Hey guys, it's Dr. K here. I'm going to do the events of the cardiac cycle. So this is really blood flow through the heart. A lot of people requested this video, so I thought I'd do a kind of simplistic one. So I split it into 4 parts, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the first one is ventricular filling. And it's exactly what it says it is. It's filling the ventricles. So you remember we have to draw our little heart, okay? The one we've been drawing. And remember, it's got atria, ventricle, atrium, ventricle, and then it's got little valves. It's got 4 valves, okay? These, and we can kind of split the ventricles here. These ones are your AV valves, atrioventricular, so remember the tricuspid and the bicuspid. And then these 2 in the middle, I'll kind of make a little bit of room here. These 2 are the semilunar valves, okay? So the pulmonary and the aortic valve. Okay, so when blood comes in, remember it comes through the atria down into the ventricles on both sides, through the atria down to the ventricles, okay? And that's called ventricular filling. Now remember, this is really due to pressure, right? And think of gravity, right? It's easier to kind of slide down the hill than to carry the sled back up. It's the same thing here. So this is really 80% of this is a passive process. Blood just kind of falls in from the atria to the ventricle. Now you think that is going to open the AV valve, right? So the atrioventricular valves open. Okay, so the bicuspid and the tricuspid, okay? And what happens is the ventricle is relaxed or in diastole, okay? So it's resting, right? Because the ventricle is not doing any work. It's just allowing something to flow into it, okay? Atrial, so the atria, they were resting for the most part. So they started in diastole, but now they're moving into systole, okay? And the reason, remember that's contraction. And the reason they do that is because they have to push the last 20% out. So remember, 80% of the blood's just gonna fall in there, but we actually need a little bit of help pushing the last bit through. So the atria contract while the ventricles just rest and allow filling, okay? Notice that the semilunar valves are still closed, right? The AV valves are open, semilunar valves are closed, the atria in systole, and the ventricles are resting in diastole. And eventually this is gonna fill, right? It's gonna fill quite up here from both sides, and you'll get the end diastolic volume, okay? The ventricle's in diastole, so the end diastolic volume is how much blood is sitting in here, okay? And it's about 120 mils, okay? It can kind of vary, but it's about 120 mils. Okay, so you filled it, okay? So what happens now? You filled it. Okay, part 2 is the Isovolumetric contraction. So isovolumetric, it means that volumes are staying the same. So nothing actually ends up moving here. So let's take a peek. Okay, so I draw my little heart again. Okay. AV valve, semilunar, semilunar. I've got my atrium and my ventricles, right? And so what happens is they're still filled with that blood. They still have that end diastolic volume in here. Yeah, both sides, okay? But what happened is the ventricle starts to engage in systole, right? Which is contraction, okay? So systole starts, okay? Now what that does is that pressure ends up pushing back on this AV valve and it closes, okay? So AV valve closes. And you know when that AV valve closes, that's what we call S1. You know in the heart rate you hear the lub-dub, lub-dub? The first lub that you hear is S1, and it's when this AV valve closes. And it's because the pressure of this blood pushes back on this valve, okay? So it closes it. However, there's not enough pressure yet to open the semilunar valve, okay? It's important. The pressure closes this one, but it's not enough to open this one. So everything's staying the same, isovolumetric, right? And at the same time, the atria is in diastole or resting. Okay, so we're resting up here. We start contracting up here. We raise the pressure, right? The pressure is raising here. And then you can probably imagine what's going to happen next, right? If you raise the pressure here, what's it going to do? It's going to eject out, okay? So the next phase is ventricular ejection, okay? So, sorry, you can barely see my little thing there. All right, so draw your heart again. You're gonna be really good at drawing this heart, right? You could draw this on an exam with your eyes closed at this point, okay? So I've got my 4 chambers and I've got all 4 of my valves, okay? And I filled everything up with blood and I have really high pressure here, right? Okay, well what happens is that pressure raises enough because you have so much, right? This is in systole. You have so much contraction here, it's going to shoot out, okay? Sorry, my cats really don't like it when I use my teacher voice, so they're just meowing in the background. Okay, so what happens is it starts to empty out of the ventricles and it starts to flow into, right, the pulmonary trunk or the aorta, okay? So you can imagine systole here, the AV valves are still closed. However, your semilunar, those valves are open, right? So those valves open, blood is ejected out, right? It's gonna go to the lungs or to the body. And you end up ejecting about 70 mils, so you'll end up with an N systolic volume, remember the ventricles and systole now, of about 50 mils. And that is just telling you what is left, what's left sitting in here. What's left sitting in here? It's about 50 mLs. You'll notice you would think, oh wait, I should pump all of it out, right? But your heart is not perfect, so it's unable to pump everything out. So you're left with a little bit in the heart, okay? And I should also mention the atria is in diastole, right? It's still resting. Okay, so then the last part, after everything's been pumped out, you can probably guess it, Isovolumetric, which means the volume's not changing, right? It's not hyper or hypo, right? It's isovolumetric, but it's relaxation now, okay? So draw your little heart again. There it is. Valves, valves, valves. All right, okay, and everything's been pushed out, and you have a teensy tiny bit of blood, right? You have the 50 mils left in here, okay? And because of that, what will happen is your AV valves are closed already, but your semilunar valves closed. Once everything leaves, they don't stay open, right? So they close. So these close here. And then they close, that's when you hear the second dub of the lub dub. So it's 1, 2, 1, 2. The first one was the AV valves closing. The second one is the semilunar valves closing. Okay, so that's S1 and S2. It's the closing of the valves. The AV valves remain closed. Now your semilunar valves are closed again. They're not open like they were. And so everything is kind of closed, okay? Now you can imagine that the ventricles are in diastole, so they're resting. In addition, we're in diastole here, right? And if they're both resting and both in diastole, volume's not moving, it stays the same, okay? And so you can think it would start again. The whole cycle starts over again at 1. You're gonna dump blood in, right? And then it's gonna fill up and build pressure. You're gonna contract, you're gonna push the blood out, and then you're gonna rest. And you're just gonna go back through the cycle again and again and again and again, right? And so that's essentially the basics of the cardiac cycle.